Welcome to Agile to Agility podcast with Miljan, Bajic. Major show alert!
The very first value we wrote is individuals and interactions.
Let's take this another level.
But those companies that weren't ever prepared, were never even thinking of going remote, now they've got the problem of, oh, we have employees that have now realized they can function remote.
Mm-hmm.
You might lose these valuable employees.
Who is Mark Kilby?
You know, I heard you ask others this question, and I'm still not ready for it. So I actually started off as electronics and robotics engineer. That's where I started school, but in my early career. But I was one of the few electrical engineers that actually enjoyed coding. So I was always given the coding assignments. And so I just did more and more of it and decided, you know, this is actually fun. I'll just shift.
Mm-hmm.
And so early part of my career was in software. I used to joke that I was also a rocket scientist for a while because I did work with NASA, so I can make that joke. And then you know, I went from tech lead to project manager and kind of started making that climb and thought,
Mm-hmm.
you know, I'm seeing a whole other class of problems here that school didn't prepare me for, but I really want to get into. And it was called people.
The toughest one, and yet we don't spend a lot of time.
Yeah, which is why I was enjoying some of the other podcast episodes that you had. And it's about this time that Ken Becks' first book came out, and I was reading that. I went, "Wow, this is crazy enough. It might work where I'm at right now. I might try this." Because I got that the part that I got about it was the synergy and the communication. Wow, that's cool. I could really see this working. And so since that time, I just kind of shifted over. I really appreciate my early teams and how they let me experiment on them. Just I'll put it that way. I would come up to them and say, "Hey, I got this new thing." They went, "Oh, not this agile thing." Yeah, but it's something that'll help. And so this is where I got into continuous integration and tried pair programming. This was like early 2000s, and did more of this. And 2001, of course, was when 9/11 happened, and jobs were scarce. So I ended up kind of going back into my old line of work as a software developer for the brand new Homeland Security Department at the time. And I can't say more about that, but one of those teams that I used to work with, they kind of resurrected their business and said, you know, that crazy agile stuff, we think we want to try it. And that was 2003, and that was actually my first official job as a Scrum Master. So from there, was for several years with that company, helped them be successful, and that was also a Department of Defense work where agile wasn't supposed to work then. Trust me.
I know. I was gonna say, I tell usually people, like, if you want to, look at, what things look like 20 years before, 10 years before, just go work for government, and it's a good indicator. Maybe with DoD it's a little bit better, but generally speaking.
Yeah, but trust me, warfighters understand to inspect and adapt. Otherwise, they wouldn't be alive. And so I have actually a lot of fun with those early agile projects in U.S. Department of Defense, and then went to work for Rally Software and just got into a ton of industries. And the funny thing was, they all had similar tech problems, but they also had similar people problems. Who knew?
I know, right? And the people problems are probably the tougher part out of those two, right?
Yeah. And strangely enough, my engineering background did not prepare me for any of that. So I had to do a lot of self-study to really understand that. And also, I had held some manager roles, so I saw how one could do it poorly. I learned that firsthand. And so it's like, okay, I've got to learn how to do this better for myself and for others. And that's what I've been doing the last 20 plus years.
How did you get into this distributed remote piece?
Yeah. So completely accidentally, it was with some of those same early companies and teams. Because as Department of Defense, it was not unusual for part of your team to be in one country and part of them to be in another country. And if I say more than that, I have to hunt you down. So I can't. I mean, it would not be unusual at times for the team to be 13 time zones apart. So I had to figure a way to make it work. And it was not so much, and we were mostly doing Scrum and XP kind of things there. And it wasn't so much about the time boxes. It was, how can we not only deliver the software, but how can we rapidly get feedback? Because that other part of the team was usually pretty close to the end users. And so they were getting real-time feedback and giving it to us and saying, hey, this is really a problem. It's not really a bug, but we need to change this because it's causing issues here for how they use the system. And so we would make changes sometimes every day and push it back. And it was amazing to see how well they responded to that. And there was one program we were on, and we were a subcontractor to a subcontractor to a prime. I mean, we were way down on the food chain. And some of the government contracting officers noticed, we have to wait 6 months or sometimes a year for some of the changes from the prime, but you guys, we just mentioned something and it seems to change in like 2 to 3 weeks. Like, how do you do that? They said, well, we have this little review meeting we do every couple of weeks. You should sit in on that. So they started sitting in, and they said, can we ask questions? And we went, oh, absolutely. This is really a great place for you to ask questions. So they'd ask questions. The team would talk about, yeah, we probably can't do that the next 2 weeks, but we could fit that in here soon. And they were seeing a change, and they invited their friends. They invited other agencies. And so they decided, you know what, when this contract is bid out again, we're going to what's referred to as make it a small business set aside, as in only small businesses can bid on it. Guess who got the prime contract? And guess who became our subcontractors? Everyone that we used to report to.
And I've seen that
too, was interesting.
And in an essence, I mean, like what you just described is just shorten the feedback loop and getting closer to the customer, right? So like a lot of times we overthink things, but it's really like, it makes it even more difficult when you have a situation like that with multiple parties with long feedback loops, or at least opportunities are to create long feedback loops. So I think we still struggle with that. How do we get closer to the customer? It doesn't matter if you're remote, distributed. It's all comes down to the feedback loop, or shorten the feedback loop. And I don't know, I'm trying to think about who. Somebody told me, like, if you want to summarize Agile concept in a couple of words, it's really about the shorten the feedback loop to the shortest possible loop given your context, right? So sometimes it can be a couple of seconds, sometimes it's going to be 2-3 weeks, but like we're always pushing ourselves to shorten that feedback loop, to validate with the stakeholders, with the customers, and just inspect and adapt. And that resonated with me. I still can't remember who said it, but it was in one of the interviews that I did.
Yeah, well, I would add to that is, and give the team as much autonomy as possible to react to that feedback, because that's going to be the faster reaction. If you have to run it up the chain and back down again, that slows the response, that slows the feedback loop. And that's what we found even in our early distributed teams was, even though we're 13 time zones apart, one, we had a really cohesive team. So they weren't always 13 time zones apart. These were certain times of the year. So we were all back usually in the same office, or at least two offices. And we would rotate who would go out to the customer site. So we knew if we didn't respond to those people who are out there, we'd be the next ones out there. So you better treat them well. but we were all really good about, what is it you're seeing? All right, let us work on the problem. We will get you some kind of fix in 12 hours. And because we knew they could go off shift and rest, and the team back at home base could work things out, and usually did, because they all swarmed the problem, which is what we talk about these days, is whether it's mob programming or whatever. It's like, get the team to swarm the problem, get all the brains to think about the problem.
So that autonomy, that swarming requires trust, right? Without trust, everything is so much harder. So what have you seen, especially when it comes to distributed teams? How do you build trust? What are some of the things, or maybe as a, maybe, for those that are listening, like that have a distributed team, a lot of times I get questions, how do we build trust? And besides, being vulnerable, and like, what tips would you give people to what are some of the ways that you've seen teams build trust and be able to?
So I'm going to do the classic consultant response. Which forms of trust are you referring to?
Well, that's a really good. So maybe because I think trust is so important, and everything becomes so hard. So what types of forms of trust? How do you categorize the types of trust?
So there's certainly the trust within the team, and then if you have larger projects, programs, release trains, whatever, that you have some dependencies. I mean, you try to minimize that, but it does happen. What's the trust between those teams? And then also, what is the trust between the team working on the product and the overseeing management? Because they're providing the resources. And when I say resources, I'm talking computers, funding, not people. The people are people for me. So there's at least those three forms of trust that you really need to work on. And it's exactly the same kinds of things you have to work on if you're all in the office. And actually, you're probably not all in the same space all the time anyway. So let's talk about the first one. So having been an engineer and knowing that most engineers aren't too into the soft skills that much, or as in the soft squishy stuff, as I sometimes hear it called. You have to look at, okay, what is it that's important to them that will build trust, but also give them something of value? Well, how long do I have to wait for somebody is usually one of those things. Because as somebody with an agile coaching approach, you want the team to collaborate, so they're collectively solving the problem. But if you have engineers that are used to tackling their problems and they get pride out of tackling the problem by themselves, you got to kind of give them opportunity to say, okay, you can't know everything. So let's look at how you can respond and how others respond to you when you do need help. And it's okay to ask for help. It's not, you haven't lost engineering points or anything if you ask for help.
Well, it also has to do with the personality, right? And I think what you're also alluding to is, like, sometimes, if you deal with introvert, like helping them understand that, and understanding them, like empathizing with them for a lot of times, at least the way that I'm more of an extrovert, but the way that introverts have described to me is like they want closer relationships. They don't want things. So if you're trying to help them, I think understanding that their preferences, and them looking maybe at how does that contribute to the team goal or what we're trying to do as a team?
Yeah.
Is that something that you look at too, like, the soft side of how
Oh.
do we understand the human side of things? And
Oh, very much so. Very much so. So in order for them to better stand each other and how they react to things, I have tried many things with remote teams. I've tried Myers-Briggs, I've tried Strength Finder, you name it, I've probably tried it. Crucial conversations, I could say, didn't go over so well for most. So they didn't care. So, but I found one exercise, and I have it on my website, that it can be very short or it can be very long based on what the team needs. And it's called the compass activity. And it's very simple. It's you have a north, south, east, and west. And there's usually some attributes tied to it. So north is you jump into action. That's your tendency. East is you need the big picture. Why are we doing this? South is I really want to get everybody's input. I tend to be in the South, both geographically and according to this activity. And then the West is I need all the details. So people who are a little more analytical, your QA folks are usually not always.
Usually,
yeah. But it's interesting, and what I do is I'll usually, if we're in a chat, if they typically use a chat tool, I'll grab their avatars out of chat. So it's something they recognize each other by. So I'll put their avatars on the board and say, okay, now that you know what the compass points are, move them where you typically like to operate. And there's the usual, can I put it in between two? And there's always this kind of, and I just say, just put where you typically tend to operate. And so you see them position it, and then you usually hear some, as they look where everybody positioned themselves, they went, oh, so Frank, you put yourself between north and west. Now I know why you get mad at me when I say slow down. Let's hear from everybody else. So, and there's a series of questions that if you want to spend more time, you can get them to think a little bit more about what those directions mean. And I usually phrase it as, we're going to talk about work preferences so we can just better understand how we can react well to each other. And I'll usually say, we can take a half hour for this. We can do it in a retrospective. And I've had teams even ask, hey, can we do that again? It's been a while. We've added a new person. And I said, okay.
I'm gonna try that out because that sounds like a really good way. Like it's almost like you that compass is serving as a visual reflection to the team, and it's easier to discuss it and discuss the observations with a tool like that. So
and that one has by far been the easiest one for them. Just think about where they run into problems. And it's successful when they start joking with each other about it. So when you hear them comment and you hear this, oh, that's a North comment. And,
that's awesome because I think it creates opportunity for them to be more vulnerable with each other. Because now, you're exposing kind of what your preferences are. And you're saying, yep, this is kind of, what I prefer to be more of a detailed person and more of, so that's great. What else? I mean, that's a great one. What other things do you do to build trust?
So honestly, for one of the best things to do is there's a couple things actually. One of the best things to do is provide space for the casual conversations. So usually one of the ways I'll start that out is I'll just, like if it's a stand-up or a regular meeting, I'll just say, hey, I'm going to be on a few minutes early. And somebody will go, why? And I'll just say, because. And some will get curious and they'll come on and I'll ask them, hey, where are you at? How's the weather? And we'll just start talking. And you build up a habit of some people showing up early. The others who come right on time go, why are you guys on already? And so they get curious. And sometimes they'll say, all right, this is the official start time. So we gotta start. but I said, if you guys want to continue some of the conversation, I got a little bit of time afterwards. So I never book back to back. I try to keep some of those spaces, even if it's 5 minutes, so that they can connect. Sometimes you have to be really creative. So I mentioned this in the book. There was one team that didn't want video, and I never forced anybody to use video, but none of them wanted video. I said, okay. And they just wanted to use phone, voice over IP. And this is what they were used to. This is how they worked. And I said, okay. And I was trying to find a way to kind of break in to tap into who they were. And so I was really struggling. And I said, well, let's try ending the meeting different ways. And so not being afraid to look stupid, I tried a couple different endings, like that's all, folks. And so I would think of different ways TV shows and movies ended meetings, and I got like no reaction for a few weeks. I went, okay, this is not working. I tried one more thing, and I said, and on that bombshell, and I hung up. 5 seconds later, the quietest guy on the team reaches out to me through direct message on chat and goes, was that from Top Gear UK? I love that show. And we spent a half hour on chat talking, and he never told anybody about that before. But that's how we connected. So sometimes you have to be very creative, but don't be afraid to share a little bit about yourself. So for instance, you're seeing, this is not a fake background. This is my messy, this is actually my wife's desk behind me.
Oh,
Yeah. So we share the office space here. And we have, it's not unusual for sometimes for kids to come in and out, although I have a warning light for them. So they know the camera's on now. But if kids come in while I'm working with team, I'll introduce them. Because it's just like, if your kids were to walk into your office, would you not introduce them to some of your coworkers?
exactly.
How is this different? Yeah.
I think a lot of people try to, which is a challenge, to separate, even before COVID, separate the private life from the work life. And we've been kind of conditioned too, as soon as we walk into the office or as soon as we join the meeting, like we're a different person. Well, you're not really a different person.
Yeah, I tried that for the first few years of my career, and that just stressed me out. So
it does, yeah.
It just takes too much energy. And when I found out that if I shared who I was at work and the same thing at home, you get to feel like, oh, I'm the same person all the time. I don't have to expend all this energy. And so people have met my kids, sometimes even on podcasts like this. Right now, my warning light is on, and the family working agreement is, if they come in with that warning light on, they will immediately be introduced to whoever is in the video. And I've seen them come in sometimes, not this one, but sometimes they've come on, the recording sign's on the door, the red light is on, and they walk in and they go, oh, they quickly close the door. They forgot.
How old are your kids?
Well, now they're older, but they've seen the red light now for a few years. So they know the red light means you're going to
I
get
gotta do
introduced.
that. I have a 5-year-old son. I gotta do that with him too. But
yeah, well,
yeah,
5-year-olds, the 5-year-olds might enjoy that, so they might come in all the time.
True.
Yeah. Yeah, now they're my youngest is 16, 20, and 21.
Wow.
But when I started that, that was when I was working for a fully remote organization. So that would have been 2014.
Wow.
Yeah, because we were going through IKEA one day. I just started this new job coaching in a fully remote organization. I went, look at this light strip. This is perfect. This is exactly what I need. And so it was an IKEA purchase. So.
That is nice. And maybe like just to kind of summarize this section, and trust is, it's really get to know your team members, be creative around how you get to know each other and how you build that trust. Because I think, the examples that you provided are a great way to go. You didn't have to do that. It's probably more work for you as a scrum master or as a facilitator to do that. but it actually creates that connection. It's those relationships that will help and make everything better. Is that kind of what you're saying, or maybe?
Yes, and
uh,
it's sort of has a fractal relationship, because
mhm,
if you start on the team and you encourage them to do it for each other, it kind of works its way out. So this
mhm,
gets to those other kinds of trust, um, trust with other teams, and trust with management. So one of the other things that I learned early on, even before it was written all over the internet, was
uh,
bring everyone together at least once a year. And this is not
mhm,
just to talk about big projects, but really to socialize.
mhm,
And yes, even your introverts like this, because what you do then is find out what do they like to do. And so it's not only planning out what are the big topics to discuss, but what kind of social activities. So not everyone wants to go to the bar. Great, bring your favorite board game. We used to
mhm.
have like long nights of board game competitions with between some of the teams, and they got to know each other, the teams got to know each other, and it built sort of a broader camaraderie. And sometimes we had management in there playing along.
I think that's something that, and maybe this is a good segue into our next topic with going back to hybrid remote work
Mhm.
environments. And I think I've been on remote teams, and exactly what you're saying, that we would, and once that I think it was even helpful, we would do it like quarterly or a couple of times a year. And it's
Yeah,
exactly just let people self-organize, just bring people together and give them opportunity to self-organize, and people will do what they like
yeah,
if they
yeah,
self-organize, right?
yeah.
What do you think with the kind of with as more and more companies are going into this hybrid remote work, it's here to stay. I mean, I think nobody's denying that. What do you think is happening? What is the current like things that you're observing, and where do you think we're going with this, the future of
Yeah.
of things?
Yeah. So the short answer, and I have a longer answer, but the short
Yeah.
answer is hybrid remote was what we all remembered before the pandemic as what we hated. And
Mhm.
now this is being proposed as the solution. So with that in mind, um, it can I and I've worked on hybrid remote teams, and it's possible to do that. And I talk about it in the book too. But if you look at it as a spectrum of fully in the office and fully remote, those do work best. And if you work hybrid remote, you need a whole other set of disciplines that
Mhm.
will actually you'll actually fight yourself, because we're used to, oh, somebody's here physically, let me go talk to them, you know.
Yeah,
We're wired to pay attention to other humans that are around us,
around this, yeah.
uh, and and so it's very hard to do that. So some of the things that I've done to help in those situations, and I again think about the people connection. How do I get the people in the space more connected with those in other spaces?
Mhm.
And I'm deliberately trying not to say remote, because I don't like any of the words we use right now. Remote, virtual,
Well,
distributed.
yeah.
So
How do you call
right now
it?
I'm experimenting with the term location free and see how that
Okay.
sticks with people. So, um, but the
Nomad
reason,
teams.
yeah, yeah, nomad has another connotation, which,
No, I
yeah,
know. I
yeah, yeah,
know.
yeah, yeah. It has multiple connotations, but whenever I hear people use remote, distributed, virtual, it's always especially in a hybrid situation, it's kind of an us versus them
Mhm.
difference, and that worries me.
Mhm.
And it's not those remote people and us. It's no, we're the team. You have to think
Mhm.
about it as the team. So with that, some things that I've done, and I've seen others write about this now. Uh, but when I was facilitating some of my first hybrid teams, I guess it was Yeah, it's probably mid 2000s. Um, I hit the classic problems of, oh, everyone in the room wanted to break out sticky notes, and then the remote people are out of luck. So I came up with the idea, you know, I really, it's too much energy to try to stay in touch with remote people and try to facilitate the conversation and be the agile coach. I need to
Yeah.
spread some of this responsibility out. So I would ask for volunteers and say, okay, those of you in the room, let's say we've got 3 who are not in the room. Can one person each stay connected with one person each that are not here, and just make
Mhm.
sure they can hear, they can contribute. If we use sticky notes, because there wasn't a lot of sticky note apps then, I think Google Docs, yeah, it was until 2008, 2009, no, 2010, before Google Docs really came out. Um, we didn't have any of those.
Mhm.
So so I would ask the buddies to make sure they are with those who are not in the room and make sure they can participate. So it wasn't unusual if we were in a conference room together. Sorry, I'm jiggling the camera, but I have my phone here. It wouldn't be unusual for people with cameras to be taking pictures, texting it to their
Send, yeah.
friends. Yeah, but they sympathized with their situation. And you see
Mhm.
things like, oh yeah, put this on my sticky notes. And they go, okay, hold on, I got to get Amy's stuff on here.
Uh,
And so, yes, it took a little more time, but there's a sense of there's others here that we
mhm.
need to take care of. And we need to take care of them as a group, not the facilitator or the coach. And
Mhm.
that was a big aha for me. It's like, yeah, that should be the way it is. It shouldn't be one person. It should be the
Person, yeah.
tribe. It should be the
Mhm.
tribe taking care of each other.
Mhm. And I think that's going to be interesting, even when it comes to training. These hybrids or, but um, so now I'm not sure. So, what's your thought on the hybrid remote environments? I mean,
So yeah, so I think it's a good interim step for companies that still aren't sure,
mhm,
because everyone went remote when very few were planning it.
mhm,
Now, companies like Dropbox were fully in the office, but they were talking about going remote. So that's why they
mhm,
made such a rapid transition. They were already discussing it as an organization. And so it's like, well, here we are. We might as well make the best of it. And
mhm,
so they're an interesting one to watch. Um, but those companies that weren't ever prepared, were never even thinking of going remote, now they've got the problem of, oh, we have employees that have now realized they can function remote.
mhm.
We might lose these valuable employees. So that's one. But two, I'm hoping some of the leadership has realized, yeah, we really don't need everyone in an office. Oh wow, that's a big problem because we've got a 5-year lease on this space, but it's a good lesson. So I'll go back to the Dropbox example because I just heard a talk from them. What they're
Yeah.
doing with their spaces right now is they're getting rid of all the individual desk space and it's becoming a studio space.
Mhm,
So they're fully remote, but they still have the spaces available if a team wants to come together for like a really deep design thinking session or something like that. Yeah, they
mhm,
could do it online, but we know it's probably going to work better altogether. The
mhm,
last company I was at, we used to do this as well. While everyone was remote, if we had some new product we were thinking about, it was not unusual that what we would do is usually get like an Airbnb house,
mhm,
get some flip charts, bring it in, and usually they'd be set up in the living room, and then people could do whatever, they could cook together, and then during the day they would kind of jam on whatever the problem is and how they were going to approach the project. but they would use those days to really kind of bond as a team as they were working through, because
Mhm.
that is a better way to do it.
And that's been my experience too. Like for most of those type of things, the team building and getting to know you, it lasts a lot longer than whatever outcomes or outputs
Yep.
result from that. So I think
Yeah.
there is going to be a need for that. But I also think, I mean, like it's like sometimes we need a kick in the butt for us to
Yeah.
realize that something is feasible. And I think
Yeah.
even
And Mother
for
Nature has given us that kick in the butt. Yeah.
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 And I think everybody's rethinking. Um, as you've seen over the last 10 years, like how tools have evolved and
Yeah.
changed.
Yeah.
What is your thought? Just how much, and maybe this is I would like to dive into a new topic of communication and collaboration, and how tools have helped us with that. Because I think doesn't matter what organization you're in. Anytime I go in, usually communication and collaboration are like either number one issue, number two issue, or number three issue,
Yeah.
or all three. Um, so, what do you think when it comes to the tools, and how have tools help us better communicate and collaborate in this more distributed and remote?
Yeah. So I think tools have played a huge role, especially in supporting all remote.
Mhm.
Um, of course, I'm kicking myself for not having shares of Zoom, but I wish I had that ability, um, but also, and this is not sliding Zoom, because all the current meeting software is like this.
Mhm.
We're really looking at the Model T of online collaboration. It's widespread. It's now well known. It'll get you where you need to go, but don't take it on a long trip. It will be painful. And I think
Yeah.
we've all realized that day-long meetings in a grid of pictures is not fun. Um, so I think, and we already saw, at least I already saw this in 2020, and it's accelerating even faster in 2021. There's a huge number of startups now that are trying to crack this problem, and not just new meeting tools, but there's a lot more activity in the AR VR space, so augmented
Mhm.
reality, virtual
Mhm.
reality. That has some issues because I played in that space for a while too. But I think we're still in that Model T era where, yes,
Mhm.
we have the common platform to connect us, but it could be better.
Mhm.
So it's not just Zoom, WebEx, all
Yeah.
all those that we are on the grids and everything, and it's not the best way for us to collaborate. And kind of going back to your hybrid question, they none of them do a great job hybrid.
Mhm.
None of them. Zoom supposedly is coming out with some feature to support that. I don't know the details of that. I just heard it in their newsletter. Um, but even in 2015, 2016, there were some very interesting solutions uh, where I was experimenting with. There was uh, not just the robots that drive around, but just even tabletop versions where you could get
Mhm.
a iPad, mini tablet. You could sit it on the robot, and it becomes sort of your eyes and ears if you're remote,
Yeah.
and you could
Uh,
remotely kind of pivot so you could look around the table. Now we
mhm.
have things like the Meeting Owl, which is something very similar, but that's a more expensive solution.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised if we see some more pragmatic solutions out of the uh, the maker space. I'm
Mhm.
somebody's going to come up with a kit where you can make your own AR VR robot thing. I'm waiting for it. I'm sure it's going to happen, and you just plug in whatever tablet you have to go.
It is, and I don't know. Like for me, like I think if I just go back uh, well, even if I go back, my family moved here in '95, and I remember my dad spending close to $1,000 on phone bills to call back to Sarajevo, and go
Yeah,
former. And we talked about the well, like imagine like where you could see other people when you call them, and
yeah, yeah, yeah,
and I feel like we're going into that space now where like we still think about it as like, imagine if I could just come into my room and put some type of gear on, and I'm
hmm
gonna have a hard time distinguishing between reality
hmm
and I think I wouldn't be surprised in 10 years where like we'll mostly be all remote in these type of things. It's just the question for me is like goes back to the people side of things. It's not
yeah,
something humans are used to for
yeah,
who knows how many thousands of years. We've been more of a touchy feely, the type of close proximity. But I do think the technology is getting pushed, and what we'll see in the near future is going to shift even more how we work.
yeah.
Um,
Well, I would say when the technology gets to the point where we don't have to turn it on, put it on, it just kind of runs in the background so that you can't tell if somebody's physically next to you or not, then it'll make the difference. Because I realized I didn't really answer your hybrid question, and this kind of goes back to it. I think with where a lot of companies, big companies in particular, are going and being hybrid to, it depends on whether they're seeing it as a way of not losing staff or really providing a benefit. So if it's really providing a benefit, my guess is they're eventually going to shift more and more remote because they're going to realize that's really going to be a better way to implement this. The hybrid situation, it's tough to treat. They're probably going to lose those employees that want to go remote, and then they're going to say, okay, we're just going to all go back in the office. So I will be very surprised in 5 years if there's a lot of hybrid implementations, unless
mhm.
there's a major technology uh, change, or actually that's the only thing I can think of. I could be wrong. So
Mhm.
it's just hybrid is difficult for us as humans.
Yeah, and this reminds me. I was looking at your Twitter profile, which I think you either posted a question or it was us in one of the I think in Clubhouse or the question: does remote re-baseline salaries? Which I think
Yeah, that was
HR
early
in
today.
general,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
which was like in general, like how does HR need to look at this whole thing? Because a lot of times they're driving
hmm
some of this change.
Yeah, yeah. Um, and it also depends on some broader issues. So you can look at how does it impact our company, our customers, and our employee. But if you take a wider view of if we allow our employees to be remote, how is that going to help their local economies? How is that going to
Mhm,
help the environment overall? I mean, we're already starting to see plenty in the climate change region,
mhm,
or the area of climate change. And as a company, do we want to help with that? Do we want to promote that? So some will, some won't. And I want to be clear, I don't believe remote's for everyone. I'm not on the everyone should be remote bandwagon. I
mhm,
don't agree with that, um, because I know some people, I know actually many people that this last year and a half, not being able to go in an office and see their colleagues was psychologically difficult for them.
mhm. How much do you think that is like something that I've been thinking about since like I recently had a group of people in my CSM class that were mostly like college students. And the way that and I've taught like undergraduate classes, graduate classes, but and what's interesting is that especially with undergraduate, especially even younger, that like this is way of life for them. Like even like as I was teaching a class in mural, they were taking notes as I was speaking. They were adding stickies as I was speaking. The other ones would add like rephrase like what somebody else said. And it's like a continuous collaboration and we're all talking. And I'm like, this is like a lot different than my typical class. And they're like, they thought I was weird for thinking that that's weird.
It's like, why wouldn't you do this? Yeah. And that's a whole other thing is, so we talked about the kids in my house. So I have 3 millennials, and I've watched how many apps they use. I've watched how my boys more so than my daughter. My daughter was never much. She will do Minecraft and things like that. She likes that. But the boys jumping from game to game with the same group, coordinating to Discord like a team. And it's just amazing how they jump from game to game with different objectives, but they stay together, they yell at each other, cause chaos. But it's like they are growing up with this skill set. It's common. It's, they're going to be very used to operating this way.
Well, that's the thing. And like, even, you said, you as a developer, like what I'm seeing today is like, we've been conditioned to like, I'm a front end developer on this application, right, on back end. And today, like kids are learning that, I'm problem solver that's solving customer problems. And, yes, I might, but I know that I have to be a full stack developer. I might need to develop other skills to understand how to help my team.
Yeah.
And it's like, so I guess the question is, how much is that shaping what people want versus, the age differences? And if the organization is looking at the next 10 years and how it invests into, where it wants to go, who are they going to focus on, and how is that going to shape personal preferences? Because at that point we're talking about personal preferences. I like talking to people, I like being in person, versus like, no, I don't, I'm fine with
I think we're going to see the ripples of this time period for a few years. I think there's going to be more shifts. I know April 2021 was the big shift reported in the U.S. labor statistics. 4+ million quit, but I don't think that's the last time we're going to see that. I have a feeling there's going to be other shifts. Probably one in the fall would be my guess, as people experiment with this hybrid, or the company says, "Oh, we don't like this," or whatever happens, and there's going to be more shifts in the labor market because of that. And I think it's going to happen a couple times. And at the same time, we have these newer generations who are already very comfortable working face to face and online, and they're going to have some opportunities, I think.
And they're gonna, I think, have some say in what their preferences are. Maybe to kind of like, and because I tried to balance it between some tips and also like, what Mark and Miljan would talk if they were having a couple of drinks and just chit-chatting. But like,
hold on.
but that's how I started in a sense. But so there's a little bit of what interests me and what might interest you, but also like, what could people get out of this, or maybe some tips. So what I would like to end on maybe is, when it comes to how, remote meetings, what would be your tips on making remote meetings work better? Or what tips would you give people to make meetings better?
Yeah, so good facilitation skills are still important. They are different online, but having a purpose, having an agenda, following that, but also being willing to adapt. So there's a human side to this as well. It's not just sticking to the agenda. But but being very clear of this is why we're meeting, this is who we need, this is who we don't need. We don't need everyone piling on the Zoom call to see if we can get all 50 little squares on the screen. And being very focused. This is another interesting thing about where those companies who've been remote for a while have experimented with asynchronous. It doesn't mean they never meet. It means they're very deliberate when they meet. They're very focused. We need to make a decision. We need to brainstorm some options. We need a high rapid feedback cycle. So that's why we're going to meet on Zoom tomorrow. Everything else they've figured out, okay, if it's information sharing, we can do that online. We don't need a meeting. If it's a Q&A, great. Then let's see what we can do online, and then anything else we can do in a meeting. But they're very deliberate in their meetings. And as I was saying before, you might provide a little buffer space around it for the human connection. How are people doing? Anything you need. So however it works in your culture to provide that buffer. But going from meeting to meeting to meeting, that's inhuman.
It is. I mean, it's, and I think we've all been there. It's like you're just there for the sake of being. And I like to, I actually share the concept of the law of 2 feet from Open Space, and one company implemented it, and they said they loved it because they were just showing up to meetings because it was on their meeting invite. And when it was made okay, it was a lot more, the meetings were a lot more focused and a lot more efficient because they could, say, these are the people that need to be here. Can we organize? And another thing that you said, which I think is so important, it goes back to the story of people taking notes for people that were not in the, I think it's that accountability that we're all responsible for the success of this meeting, and that it's not just the facilitator, but we all need to think about, given the context, what can we do to focus, to understand what it is that we need to do in order to make this meeting effective for everyone. And I think a lot of times that's misunderstood. It's like the Scrum Master should think about that, and it's their meeting, not ours.
And instead look at how do you spread that responsibility out. So one practical tip is, if you tend to take notes in Google Doc, first thing you should do is say, here's the notes, purpose and agenda. I'm running the meeting. Who's going to take notes? And then keep your hands off the Google Doc. Don't start taking notes, even if you're tempted to do that. Let others jump in, and you'll usually find 1, 2, 3 other people will jump in. Or if they're of the appropriate age, they'll all jump in and put sticky notes, as you said in your